If regional Australia needed a voice, then I've got to say they've got one now. And I thought one of the most interesting things that you said on when the decision was made about where things were going, when you said, I've been saying this for 35 years and people haven't been listening to me, they've now got to listen. And they are now listening as a result of the fact that for this period of time, Bob Katter and that group of independents has the capacity to do all sorts of things, and not least of which is to represent regional South Australia in a very forceful manner, which is causing people to reassess and look at the way that regional Australia works. And Katter has been driving much of that agenda over the past 35 or so years, but come in particular focus in the past couple, 18 months or so. Where it goes to from here, this is the ride when you're involved with Bob Katter. You never know. This is a ticket that Australia has taken, you know, in a roller coaster ride, which we're up for it, and we're into it, and there's no getting off this particular. No, I won't say merry-go-round. I'm talking about something that goes up and down as opposed to round and round, because Bob's passion about regional Australia is something which is it can't be measured in anything other than very large shovelfuls. I'm delighted that he has come here today. We want him to direct his attention to the topic that says that is different to what the general discussion is going to be about, but the exercise is about beyond political life, and independent perspective is the topic that Bob is going to be addressing for the next, how long is it, 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll have a panel discussion and introduce our other three participants, and then the panel discussion will start. We'll then take a break and come back and finish it off. So that's the exercise for this afternoon. Would you please make welcome to the microphone somebody who you've come from some distance to see, and he's come from some distance to be here. We're delighted that the Honourable Bob Katter is here with us this afternoon. Bob Katter.
Doyle, be careful. I've got the right to reply here. Very many distinguished ladies and gentlemen. When I first went into politics as a young man in my late 20s, I got very angry with Gough Whitlam, and we had this old incomprehensible bloke called Bajogi Peters. We couldn't even pronounce his name, but he started making Whitlam bleed, and I thought, he's got to be good. He's doing that. He's got to be good. And he appealed to me greatly. But when I got elected to Parliament, another Cloncurryite like myself, Tom Aikens, who the history books say was the greatest speaker in Australia, they said better than Menzies, because Menzies couldn't use humour. Aikens could. But when I walked into Parliament, he said, "Katter, you've got a great future in politics, my boy, but you must remember, if you want to be a politician, you must be able to take a small molehill of truth and create from it a vast edifice of illusion." Bill Hayden said, if you want a future in politics, he said, look forward to 10,000 fates worse than death. But the one I liked most was Neil Turner. He just died recently, a very close friend of mine. A great tragedy to become Premier of Queensland. But they decided to build a $50 million self-indulgent, spectacular parliamentary annex to Parliament House with very modern accoutrements for us all. And I said, I mean, excuse my language though, fair bloody go. I've got all my railway workers on dirt floors. They've got to cart water in buckets. We're out there building Taj Mahals for ourselves. And anyway, there was a huge, no, sorry, it was a culture centre. What am I saying? It was a culture centre. I said, we're out there spending money on a culture centre. I mean, you can't possibly be serious. And anyway, I got angrier and angrier, and there's a fair few of them backing me up. And this Neil Turner's a very big bloke. He'd knocked unconscious the heavyweight champion of Queensland. And Turner grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me down. He said, sit down, you silly BASBD. He said, we're outnumbered, 120 to 1, 86 to 2 here. Sit down and shut up. And I said, well, you just, And I got back up again and got stuck into it. And eventually, one of them yelled out, bloody National Party, they wouldn't know what culture means. And Turner leaned around and grabbed the bloke by the throat and he said, "We do so, it means agriculture." I was a very smart young man who'd been to university until I found out I was there and booted me out. But I did a couple of years of economics, and I knew that the free market determines everything. In the long run, you know, the free market, supply and demand determines price. And if you try and override that principle, you'll get yourself into a lot of trouble. And I thought one of the portrayals of one of the more biggest scumbags on earth was the portrayal of a President of the United States. I won't mention his name, but Primary Colours, I think, was the name of the movie. And he addresses the workers there. And he said, "I do not come here to lie to you." Well, when a politician says that, be careful. Be careful. He said, "I'm not going to treat you like idiots. The reality is that there are certain areas of the economy which we cannot compete in. We must free market, and there are some jobs that just simply have to go. So I come here to tell you the hard truth." So as a very bright young man that knew everything about everything, as we all do in our 20s, we had the collapse of the wool industry, and I was buying sheep and selling them for pet meat because we were just liquidating the Australian wool industry. There was no future for it. Mining boom, wages going through the roof, droughts stalking the land, synthetics coming on at 100 mile an hour. There was no future in wool, and I was going to make a big quid out of it, turning them all into pet meat. A bloke called Doug Anthony, and you know, history books, it's funny when you write a history book. I never intended, I'll have a history book, History of Australia, published in January this year. It's very good, you should all buy it, it's $39. But I didn't intend to write about Doug Anthony at all. But, you know, when you write a history book, you don't control the history, it controls you. You just start writing and you just got to take the story wherever it leads you. And I carry around with me wherever I go. It's in the briefcase outside, in the car, 2 quotes by Doug Anthony. And one of them, and I'll come back to this, Doug said, "You bring down the dollar or I bring down the government." He did not say that to Billy McMahon. He said that to the national press. And Billy McMahon said, "Oh no, I can't say that. I'll have to talk to him." So the 3rd day he said it again. And the 5th day, the dollar was brought down. Now he followed a great country party tradition. They had brought the government down 3 times. And you know, I remember when Doug Anthony did it, and people I knew said, "Oh, he's going to put the socialists in. Shock, horror, terror. You know, he can't do that." And then he introduced the wool scheme, which brings me back to the subject of wool. And I thought, no, this ain't going to work. You cannot override supply and demand. So I lost 20,000 years to another bloke who stupidly bid $1 for the years. And 3 years later, of course, he had 40,000 sheep from that $20,000 outlay. And he bought them for $1. He put out $20,000. And they went to $17 after Anthony introduced the minimum price scheme. And so I repeat that slowly. He bought them for $1. And because they had little lammies and they grew up, he had 40,000 sheep worth $17 each. He had made, in terms of today's money, about $13 million. And I learnt my lesson well. When he said, "I'm going to introduce the minimum price scheme, and you will collectively." And there are 2 great families in the political organisation that I belonged to all of my life, and I still belong to today. The political organisation. 2 great men, Jack McEwen. And he sat there on a dirt floor in a galvanised iron shed eating rabbits. And he said, "I'm sick of this. We are going to form a cooperative. And the supermarkets are not going to tell us what they pay us for the milk. We're going to tell them. We're going to have collective bargaining and we're going to put a price on our product." And he became a very great man as a result of of that belligerent stand that he took when he was in his 20s. Now, Doug Anthony's forebears are rather interesting as well, because I think they came from Italy, his forebears. And his granddad said, "I'm sick of selling bananas for nothing." Now, hey fellas, this is the Northern Rivers District in New South Wales, that where all the bananas were growing there. He said, "From now on, fellas, we sell through the cooperative." And those that didn't want to sell through the cooperative, well, I make reference to the Italian connection. They sort of got, you know, horses' heads and beds, legs broken. But both of them are called Blackjack. Larry Anthony was called Blackjack, and he wasn't called Blackjack for nothing, because there had to be an application of force to convince those stupid people that if you just go out there in the marketplace, you're going to be killed. You've got to have some degree of collective bargaining, or else you're in a lot of trouble. And take very great pleasure in being able to say a few words along these lines today. The wheat stabilisation scheme, Chifley always claimed that he had introduced the wheat stabilisation scheme. And if there's one thing that really made Blackjack McEwen angry, was when Chifley claimed that, because he always claimed he did it. And in actual fact, they arguably both did it. But they claimed it because both of them saw that this was one of the greatest things that ever happened in Australia, was the wheat stabilisation scheme. And the president of our party is one of the 20 biggest wheat growers in Australia, and he described to me today how a foreign corporation is just about the only person you can sell your wheat to. And if you want to carry it somewhere, was another foreign corporation owns all the silos effectively in Queensland. And the transportation blokes, you know, whinging and screaming because, you know, they're going down the chute as well, the transportation people, as a result of it. McEwen had many great claims to fame, but in the beef industry, he, after a brutal fight with the British government, got the beef agreement out of Great Britain, and almost all of our export beef went to Great Britain then. And what happened in Queensland, and I can't speak for South Australia, but the beef market in Queensland was controlled almost completely by Lord Vestey, who owned about 2.5% of the surface area of Australia, controlled all of the international refrigerative shipping, and most of the meatworks in Australia. And the Theodore government, a very, very great government in Australian history, the Theodore built public abattoirs and built, actually, government-owned butcher shops. And they all went broke. Lost a lot of money, actually. But they smashed Lord Vestey, and we were able to get a price for our product. And then on top of that, McEwen came in and introduced the beef trade agreement with Britain, which was brutally enforced by him. And we were able to get a decent price for our cattle. In the sugar industry, the same Theodore government, we worked for nothing. There's a poem that represents the feeling of that era. We've cut in the mud, and I come from cane cutting country. Queensland's very much cane cutting country. We've cut in the mud that's red as blood, dodging the crocs, fire, drowning and flood. The company's offered us 2 shillings a dray. I'll starve before I work for that pay. Now, until we've the guts, the fight and the will, we'll live on these bent to the company mill. So no more will you see Tommy, Vince, Charlie and me. It's up to the straights and out on the luggers, and we'll work no more for you hungry buggers. And you can almost feel the rage and hatred that drips out of that poem that reflects that period in Australian history where 1 in 300, everyone cut cane by hand in those days, 1 in 300 of us that cut cane, because the mills would not accept burnt cane, we had to cut it wet, and that meant that we got leptospirosis. So 1 in 300 of us that worked in the cane fields died of leptospirosis. I might add as an interesting side comment, we're dying again of leptospirosis from the flying foxes, which the government has forbidden us to remove in Queensland. Now, when Blackjack McEwen retired from politics, and they said, the interview's in my book, it's a great interview very famous commentator in the ABC. He said, Mr McEwen, it is said that the Country Party tail wags the Liberal dog. And McEwen didn't say anything. He said, is it true that you've run the government since the Second World War and not Menzies? And then he said again, you know, does the Country Party tail wag the Liberal dog? McEwen said, yes. That's all he said, yes. When he retired from politics, he said, I retire in the knowledge that every single rural industry in this country has an arrangement that allows them to have a moderate prosperity. And that is a great quote. When I retired, every single rural industry had an arrangement that enabled us to have a moderate prosperity. Now, I say with absolute venom, and you've seen me on television and you can see the rage and hatred that is in my soul, as I watched every single plank that created the great edifice of agriculture in this country kicked to pieces and chopped down by brainless little Lilliputians. And that's the only word I can use to describe them. And for people that think that my comments, this fellow over here laughing at me, people that think that my comments are stupid, well, don't worry me that people call me Looney Tunes or funny or humorous or, a country buffoon or a hick. Doesn't worry me, because that's probably what I am, actually. But let me say this, that we had a poll come out last week in Queensland. We're leading in that poll. We're leading the LNP. We're a little fledgling party with 4 people in it, employees, no one member of parliament, and nothing else. But do you know what? The people of Australia have really had enough. You know, they are sick of watching their jobs exported overseas every night on the television. About 10,000 in the last week, last 2 weeks, I might add. They're sick and tired of seeing governments privatise everything, and we absolutely know they're going to be flogged off by the slithering suits out of Sydney overseas. So the great institutions that we built, my family, were one of the original 100, not the one of the original 20, but one of the original 100 investors in Qantas. We put a lot of money in that we could ill afford, but it was a good thing for our nation. It was the people's airline, and it was a good thing for our nation. We never regretted losing our money. Grandad, he told me that many times. But now, they privatised it. Well, they said, no, I won't be able to sell it overseas. The majority of Qantas is in the international airline, and it's gone. 2/3 of it are gone. The way the legislation works, Nick Xenophon explained it to me, he's gone over it, that they can do it. So we don't have an international airline. Someone's flogged it off on you so they could buy their way through an election. That's why they flogged it off. Not free market reasons, because they could get $1,000 million or $10,000 million, whatever it was, they buy their way through an election. So Wall, Mr. Clever Keating, the father of free markets in Australia, and his acolyte, Mr. Costello, they introduced free markets. We have the most free and open markets in the world. We have removed all protection. Now, the image that some people might conjure up with the removal of protection, the image I have of the removal of protection is sending our champion out into the arena, our Mr. Farmer, out into the arena and say, hold on, Mr. Farmer, what are you doing with that sword? Give me that sword. Give me that helmet, Mr. Farmer. Give me that shield. What are you doing with all those things? We want you to be tough. You go out there without the shield and the sword and the helmet, you'll get tough. Mr. Farmer, you'll get tough. It'll make you tough. No, it'll get you dead. The other bloke's got a sword and a shield and a helmet. You'll get dead. That's what'll happen to you. Now, am I right? Or are my critics right? Am I right or am I my critics right? Was Doug Anthony wrong? You know, and created prosperity for all of us? Was Jockey Peterson wrong? Was Playford wrong? Was Mr McEwen wrong? Were all these, and Mr Menzies too for that matter, were they all wrong? And the current crop of politicians right? Well, let's have a look at their handiwork. Let's have a look at their handiwork. You've got to be judged by your outcomes. Let's have a look at their handiwork. Wool, 176 million sheep. Now we've got 68 million sheep. Well, that's pretty successful. Congratulations, Mr Keating, on that one. I won't comment about wheat because it's very much dependent upon seasons, of course, as you well know. Beef, we had 33 million head of cattle in Australia. We now got 26 million head of cattle in Australia. So that was a great success story, that one. Dairying, we're down 15%. Sugar, we are closing a sugar mill every year. We have only 20 left, and it's the third, has always been the third biggest, one of the three biggest rural industries in this country. And you know, what does that mean to me personally? Well, a very nice young man. He went out the week before last and bought 20 foot of rope from the local hardware store in Innisfail, and he threw it over a tree within a kilometre of our office in Innisfail, and hung himself on the end of it until he was dead. He was from a town called Babinda, where the sugar mill closed last year, because everybody's getting out of sugar because there's no money in sugar. And the farms are being bought by lifestylers, rich people from the cities, and they're being bought by people who just have a few moo cows wandering around on them, and the industry is closing down. In sharp contrast, the Brazilian industry is building 20 mills a year. We only have 20 mills. They're building 20 mills a year because their government went to ethanol. Our government, the LNP government, actually smashed the ethanol industry. We had 72 million litres. By the time they'd finished with it, we had 24 million litres. That was all. And I can tell you right here and now that the cattle industry needs ethanol for survival. The Americans are buying that cheap distiller's grain at prices you just simply cannot believe. Same calorific value as ordinary grain, 3 times the nutritional value. So where does all this lead us? Where does all this lead us? Where am I going with this? Well, I come here to tell you today, if you're in agriculture, as far as I'm concerned, you are doomed. And when I was a minister, and a very powerful minister, I think I was the second ranking minister in the Queensland government, I had responsibility for the state bank. And I wore that responsibility with a great degree of pride. 25% of the third biggest agricultural industry in Australia was on the ropes, the sugar industry. We had it down in prices. And we went in with the state bank, as we had always, as a political group. We went in with our state bank and we provided 2% interest rates and no repayments for 3 years. And we brought almost all of that industry through alive. Now the bloke who was head of that bank, he said to me at one of those snobby clubs that you go to, he said, "Oh Bob, you know, we've got to face reality in the sugar industry. A third of it has to go, doesn't it?" I said, "No, Graham, no, a third of it doesn't have to go. I'll come down tomorrow and talk to you about it." And so I went down, I was the minister, but I went down and saw him. And I could speak no sense to him. And I spoke to the treasurer, and so we sacked him and helped the farmers through. That state bank has been sold by my own party when I was a member of it, I might add. And all of the other banks that we relied upon for assistance in bad times were all sold by my own party when I was a member of it. And I say that with very great shame to stand here before you and say that to you. So what happens if you do all these things? Your cattle numbers are down, your sheep numbers are down, your sugar industry's closing down, all your farmers are asking for subdivisions, they all want to get out. What happens to your country? Well, you become a net importer of food. And that's what we're sitting here to talk about today. You know, and I love Carol. I listened to her on the radio this morning. I love Carol, and that's the sort of positive, aggressive attitudes, Carol, that we need. And I'll turn positive in a moment. Right?
Does that mean I get the hat?
The last person asked for the hat, they paid $2,700 for it. I'm listening to any offer, Carol. if you, and I'd ask this to be put up, where's the, oh, up here. I just draw your attention, this is trade in food and live animals, and if you come down here, it's 2009, 2010, go back 10 years to 1999, and you can see there that it's about 16,000 million a year, 16,000 million for exports. So we had 16,000 million exports, we had about 3,500 in imports. Now the imports have skyrocketed up to 8,500 million, about 250% they've gone up. Let's go back to the exports. So as I say, those 3-year average is about 16,000 million. Our exports now are about 20,000 million. So the exports have gone up 25%, the imports have gone up 250%. In other words, your imports are skyrocketing and your exports are growing at a very small pace. If I want to jiggle the figures, you know, I can say we're on 21,000 million back at the start of this 10 years, and we're now down to 19,500 million. Our exports actually gone down if I want to start playing around with the figures. But I'm not, I'm just trying to pick an objective figure. Now whether you want to, if you take the, it says trade in food and live animals, you can't eat a live animal, so if you take the live animals out and you can't eat coarse grain and take the coarse grain out, within 3 years we'll be a net importer of food. If you want to do those figures without taking coarse grain and live animals out, it'll be 9 years. If you want to use the criteria used by the Fin Review, they said we're a net importer of food now. Right now we're a net importer of food. Now just think about this. For some of you are around my age, if someone had said to you 20 or 30 years ago that you live in a country that can't feed itself, you would have thought he was quite mad. We had a bloke walked around in a hat turned down and said we were going to be the supermarket, food bowl of Asia. Well, thanks to his policies, we'll be the begging bowl of Asia. That's what we'll be. That's what we'll be. The begging bowl of Asia. We won't even be able to feed ourselves. And I don't want to go sideways on anything else. We're talking about agriculture today. But, you know, 86% of them... Well, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that. I'll come back there because it's a good thing to come back to. So, what to do? Carol, you know, you're a very positive person. What to do? Let's put up that second map of South Australia. Yeah. I mean, I was quite amazed at this map, actually, because most of it you're not allowed to do anything with. I don't need to say anything more than that, really. But we call it the greenie monster. And the greenie monster has to be fed every 4 months, you know. It's a hungry animal and it's got to be fed every 4 months. We're about to give it the Coral Sea, you know, so there'll be no more fishing in northeastern Australia. And then the southwest of Western Australia, we're about to feed it that, you know. We're about to give it another 4 rivers in Queensland, the wild rivers. The greenie monster's got to be fed. Every 4 months it has to be fed. And if it doesn't, you know, the sky will fall. Now there's precedent for this. The ancient Druids, some of my forebears in England, ancient Druids, they sacrificed people, human sacrifice to the trees. And so did some of the Germanic tribes. So there's precedent for sacrificing human beings for the environment. But we're doing it on a grand scale in Australia. That map, I don't really have to say any more than that map. It just map says it all. I don't have to say any more than that. We're heading the same way in Queensland. The re-regulation of these industries. And people tell me you'll never get that. Well, look, I don't know whether these polls are valid in Queensland. But I'll tell you, we're going to be getting it in Queensland. You know, if those polls are right, we're going to be getting it all right. Because people that know me and saw me in action when I was a minister, you know, it didn't worry me, the criticism. They changed the mining laws in Queensland, and the mining companies walk all over the top of the farmers and just take their land off and pay them nothing. And I said, well, I'm now the mines minister, and we're about to reverse the laws back to Bajocki Peterson's day. And they said, oh, we'll pass a vote of no confidence in you on the eve of the election. So take that. And I said, make my day, Buster Brown. Well, they didn't. It wasn't too pleasant, actually. I was actually told, but it bloody well hurt, I can tell you. But I still did it all the same. And in the area of Aboriginal legislation, I walk with very great pride. There are still two books on the leading list at the university, what we accomplished there. And out of the most conservative government in Australia, maybe in Australian history, we got the most radical legislation for our first Australians. And everyone, in fact, including Bajocki Peterson, was very proud of what we had done there. All of it's been reversed now, of course. But you say, well, you'll never get re-regulation of the dairy industry. Well, that's your problem. I'm saying that if we get the power, you'll get the re-regulation of the dairy industry, I'm telling you. And if you think Woolworths and Coles are going to beat us in the courts, then make my day, Mr. Woolworths and Coles. There's a good reason why Teddy Theodore's face is carved up on Mount Rushmore with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, the founders of the American nation. The reason is because he took Rockefeller on. And everyone said, you're not going to win against Rockefeller. Heavens, how are you ever going to win against Rockefeller? Well, he smashed Rockefeller's company into 23 companies. And he was a man of very great courage and commitment. He believed that there was a right and a wrong. And Nick Xenophon, he's got some quotable quotes, but he said, it's not about left or right, it's about right or wrong. And he is dead right. Bajocki Peterson always used to say to me, he said, Bob, it's very simple, you just decide what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do, and then you do the right thing. Well, sometimes people would disagree with what he thought was the right thing, but anyway, that was the way that he handled it. So re-regulation of these industries, you know, and I say simply must be undertaken. For those that question me on this, I love an argument on this. If ever I love an argument, the guns, I love the argument on guns because our intellectual position is so enormously powerful. And I say to people that say, oh, you know, that was the scheme, Wall scheme wrecked the industry. I said, oh, isn't it funny? In the 2 years after regulation, the price doubled. And in the 2 years after deregulation, it halved. Oh, what an interesting coincidence. I mean, the other possibility is that when you collectively and aggressively market a product, you'll get a hell of a lot better price than if you don't. And look no further than Woolworths and Coles. By consolidating every single supermarket in Australia, they have been able to pay you virtually nothing for your product. When we were deregulated in the dairy industry, I don't know what the situation was here, but I know what it was in New South Wales and Queensland. The day before deregulation, we were on 59 cents a litre. The day after, we were on 42 cents. And the price went up 41 cents a litre to the consumer over the next 3 years. So, I mean, who profited? They say, oh, why did they do that? Well, follow the money trail. When somebody made $1,000 million a year extra profit. I mean, I wonder who? I wonder who? I'll leave that question for you to answer. Having said those things, water is a burning issue in Australia, and I still get quoted as saying we should close down farming in southern Australia and move it north. And I mean, I've never remotely said that. I've been a great advocate for the Bradfield scheme, which says take the water from the north and send it down here. I've given many speeches about the chief engineer, and this is what brings me where I'd just like to sort of start to conclude. We've lost the vision of what we might be in Australia. I mean, people say, oh, you'll never get back to re-regulation of the dairy industry. Well, that was not what our forebears thought. That was not what Jack McEwen thought. He thought we need to do it, and we've got to do it. he didn't say, oh no, it can't be done. And when we talk about water, you say, oh, well, it can't be done. The Bradfield scheme was conceived by Dr. Bradfield, and the chief engineer for the Queensland government, I won't say what position he holds, but the chief engineer, he said there's some idiots going around talking about the Bradfield scheme. He said there's no shortage of Looney Tunes. But I said, mate, can I ask you a question? What have you built in your lifetime? And he didn't answer me. I said, well, you built a shed, you built a road, you built a bridge, you built anything. Oh, he said, well, I'm not that sort of engineer. I said, all right, so you know that the Bradfield scheme is a stupid idea, and you obviously know all about it, and you've never built anything. Well, this bloke built the Burrinjuck Dam, the Hume Weir, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Sydney Underground Railway System, which is still working today, which he won the International Prize for engineering in that year. He built the Story Bridge in Brisbane. He built the University of Queensland. And you built nothing. Yet you're saying that I should listen to you and not Dr. Bradfield. Well, I'm sorry, mate. I'm sorry, mate. And he said that if you fill Lake Eyre with water, it'll make it rain. And Lake Frome and Lake Torrens were filled for 2 years, and downstream from the lakes, the rainfall went up 2.5 inches. It didn't go up 2.5 inches anywhere else. And that attracted them to this idea that they could fill. And it's about 4,500 million, which is a piece of cheesecake, really, because the salt production from just a little 2% of the lake will pay for it. But you sell lake land, wouldn't it be beautiful to live on a great lake like that out, where you've got a bit of space around you and only 3 or 4 hours from Adelaide, a big city. And you say, but that'll never happen. Well, it'll only never happen if you've got such a small vision for your country that you can't conceive of it happening. That's the only reason why it won't happen. But 30 million megalitres is blown over the Murray-Darling Basin and up against the Great Dividing Range on the inside of the Great Dividing Range. Now, they've done modelling on this, and the modelling proves conclusively that it won't work. Well, if it doesn't, you've got to explain to me where the 30 million megalitres of water has gone. I mean, it can't just vanish. If it blows in from the Pacific Ocean, it makes it rain on that side. So, if it blows from this side, surely the whole Murray-Darling Basin has a runoff of 22 million megalitres. We're talking here about moving 30 million megalitres. But whether you want to do that or not, the idea that we have a problem in the Murray-Darling, therefore we'll close down farming on the Murray-Darling. I mean, if there's one great achievement, truly outstanding achievement of this nation, that it took an area of land called the Murray-Darling catchment, where 60, maybe 70,000 people lived 200 years ago, and it turned that area into an area so productive that it could feed 25 million people. Provide a full feed regime for 25 million. What an extraordinary achievement by this race of people called Australians. What an extraordinary achievement. And now, that section of my book is called Walking with Giants. The next section of the book is The Rise of the Lilliputians. And that's what you see today, the Lilliputians in the driver's seat throughout politics in Australia, the Lilliputians. And they say, oh, we've got a problem here because of the environment and the green monster has to be fed or they won't vote for me in the next election. Therefore, we'll close down 40% of the Murray-Darling. I mean, future generations, it probably won't be Australians, future generations of people in this country will say, geez whiz, they were good people, these people, they left all these resources for us. They didn't put any population in, they left it empty. It's great fun, you know. This country is really great fun. Which brings me back to the motor cars. So when they say you can't do something, they told their thief that you can't export coal from Australia. We're a coal importing country. You just can't export coal from Australia. And we were. In the 50s, we were a coal importing country. Now, he said we can export coal. No one believed him. Now we're arguably the greatest coal exporting nation on earth. They said you can't turn the waters back to snowy mountains, ratbag stuff, you know, cost the earth. You'd never do that. Well, we did do it. You know, we turned 2 sleepy old rivers that hardly had any water into 2 great irrigation canals that drought-proofed arguably 7% of the surface area of Australia. What a great achievement. But we were told we couldn't do it. But there were men there that believed that we could do it. In the motor vehicle industry, they said we could never make motor cars in Australia. We don't have the technology to do that. We don't have the population. And a man called Lawrence Hartnett and Ben Chifley decided that we could. And before Mr Keating started these policies, which are destroying our country, 86% of the motor cars in Australia are Australian-made. This year, 14.5% of the motor cars built in Australia are Australian-made. And I conclude, as I mentioned earlier very briefly, on the subject of ethanol. I think almost every European country that I've checked out has biofuels legislation. Most certainly the Northern Americas, Canada and the United States have ethanol legislation. Brazil, you know, most of South America has ethanol legislation. China and India are both implementing policies at the present moment in this area. So we remain the only country on earth that doesn't have a biofuels policy. Now, the interests of the oil and gas industries are not served by ethanol. It is very much against their interests to go to ethanol. Now, I'll tell you what happens when you go to ethanol. Have we got that picture? Yeah. Yeah, that's a handsome film star there we hired to do this picture for us. And he's filling up his Holden motor car in Sao Paulo in Brazil. I've only been overseas once, and I actually went overseas to get that photo. That's why I went overseas. That's alcohol, which is ethanol, and it's 123.9 Rias, which is 74 cents a litre. So there I am, filling my car up for 74 cents a litre. In Minnesota, I lost the photo from Minnesota, but some of you would know the price of petrol in America anyway. It's 84 cents a litre. I come back to Australia, and it was 139 cents a litre. So for you bushies, wouldn't it be nice to be filling up your car on 84 cents a litre instead of 140 cents a litre? Wouldn't that be nice? Now, it is introduced in New South Wales. Premier Iema said, I cannot go another day. People are dying that do not have to die. And in America and Brazil, actually, it was not to help their farmers or their balance of payments, anything like that. It was actually over the issue of people dying. Sao Paulo and Rio are the most polluted cities in the world, and they needed to clean them up. And that was the way. When they did studies in California, tens of thousands of people were dying here, didn't have to die. And that was why the Americans went there. But, and God bless Iema. But that's the only state in Australia that has moved in that direction. As far as the rural industries go, well, your cattlemen, they were paying $70 in the United States, $70 a tonne for distiller's grain, which is 3 times more nutritious than ordinary grain and has the same calorific value. I mean, if they're murdering us in the world market, the American cattlemen, well, they exported 10 million tonne last year. That's how much distiller's grain they've got in the United States. So we desperately need it for survival and to move forward in our cattle industry and our pork industry and our chook industry, fish farms, although we've hardly got any fish or prawn farms left in Australia. We desperately need it. People are dying that don't have to die. I'd like to fill my motor car up on 84 cents a litre instead of 140 cents a litre, my motor car. And there's another little matter, and when I left school at 17, I just turned 17 when I finished my matriculation, and I was handed a rifle, an SLR rifle, and told I had to give them 3 telephone numbers. I was on 24-hour notice to go and fight the Indonesians over oil, to protect our oil pipeline. Now, I think every single year since 1964, this nation has been at war. Our sons dying to protect our oil pipeline. Now, it would be nice if we could produce our own oil instead of importing it from overseas. We have been self-sufficient up to 5 years ago. We're not now. We're importing 30 or 40% of it, I might add, from Indonesia. So, I mean, it sure would be nice to be self-sufficient in oil as well. Those are the benefits that flow. So we can make it rain. We can put water into that sleepy old Murray-Darling River, taking a little bit of the Clarence, moving it backwards, recycling a bit of our water. And I should add this, and I just forgot, it's only a little tiny thing, but it's important. In Mareeba, we did up the delivery systems. 55% of the water allocated did not get to the farm gate. Our delivery systems were just leaking and messed up and inefficient. When we spent about $15 to $20 million, we delivered 95% of the water. So if we do up the delivery systems in the Murray-Darling, we can put more water down. I do not want to close farms in South Australia. I want to open more farms, and I want more water available for the farmers down here. So I conclude by saying to you, if you come to my office, you'll see a big picture of Ted Theodore, that regulated the sugar industry. You'll see a big picture of Jack McEwen, who regulated the wheat and the dairy industry of Australia. And you'll see a certificate on the wall, which is my great-granddad's brother, Bert Henley. When you have a forebear that dies in the war, you get these certificates. And the most poignant scene I've ever seen in a movie was in Saving Private Ryan. And the mother is standing in the doorway, and the black car pulls up, and 2 men walk up the driveway carrying the telegram to tell her that 3 of her children are dead. And everything that is in that woman's body just crumbles. She just falls into the floor. She melts. And my great granny, she had the car pull up, and the telegram given to her that her son had died at Gallipoli. And his name was Bert Henley. And a bit of bitter irony, Bert Henley, his nephew, my grandmother's brother, my great-granny, she waited at the doorway and got the telegram saying that her son, also Bert Henley, had died on release from Shanghai prison. Now, we repay those people by closing down our agriculture in this country? No, we're not going to, Carol. We're going to go forward. We're going to win. Thank you very much. It's a very great honour for you.